The council chamber of the Galactic Empire shimmered with opulence, its high arches lined with banners of 1,000 conquered worlds. Representatives of proud species crowded the amphitheater, their voices echoing in anticipation. For them, this was routine, another defiant civilization summoned to kneel, another lesson in imperial authority. Many watched with smug amusement, convinced the matter would end with signatures and subjugation. To the Empire, negotiations were theater, a ritual where the weaker side learned obedience under the weight of power. Yet silence rippled through the vast chamber when the human envoy entered. He was no diplomat draped in silks, no merchant weighed down by gifts. A soldier stepped forward instead, the kind who carried his scars like emblems. His uniform bore no extravagant display, only the plain insignia of rank, but his bearing held something sharper than any regalia, an iron steadiness that unsettled even species bred for war. His eyes swept across the chamber, unwavering, as if he had already measured every adversary and found them wanting. The expectation was that he would bow, at least symbolically, before the council's authority. No one had ever ignored the customary gesture, not even those who intended to resist later. The human general did not lower his head. He did not even slow his stride. He walked to the central platform, stopped, and stood with the stillness of stone. His silence was louder than a declaration. He refused to participate in the ritual that made all others subjects. The councillors shifted uneasily. Some whispered about human arrogance. Others sneered, certain that defiance was hollow without the weight of fleets to enforce it. The Empire's High Speaker, a towering figure whose species had ruled for centuries, recited the litany of demands: surrender of all military vessels, payment of tribute in energy and minerals, subordination of laws to imperial decree. The words carried the weight of precedent. Entire civilizations had been broken on less. The general listened without expression. His posture remained locked, neither combative nor submissive, a deliberate refusal to give the Empire even the satisfaction of visible reaction. Every demand rolled past him like wind against granite. The chamber's acoustics magnified his silence, drawing attention to the contrast between their thunderous proclamations and his calm refusal to acknowledge them. When the recitation ended, a hush fell. All eyes focused on the human. It was expected he would begin the ritual of bargaining, pleading for lesser terms, showing fear. Instead, he remained still, arms at his sides, gaze fixed on the High Speaker. He did not ask for time. He did not debate conditions. He simply stood, as if the speech had been nothing but noise. The weight of that silence spread until the audience of species, predators, philosophers, bureaucrats alike, began to feel the pressure of it. The High Speaker demanded a reply. The general gave none. His refusal to even engage was not an oversight. It was a statement more powerful than words. Every second he withheld a response, the more the Empire's dignity frayed. The ritual depended on submission, on recognition of their authority. He had denied them that entirely. Murmurs erupted. Some councillors hissed accusations of barbarism. Others laughed derisively, calling humans reckless and doomed. But beneath the mockery ran a vein of unease. Empires could tolerate rebellion, even threats, but they could not tolerate irrelevance. To be treated as if their power meant nothing was a wound deeper than open defiance. Still the general stood, impassive, his eyes unblinking. He had made his choice clear without uttering a single word. Humanity would not beg, humanity would not bow, and humanity would not allow itself to be negotiated into servitude. In that silence, the old rhythms of domination faltered. The chamber, once accustomed to easy submission, felt the first tremors of chaos. The chamber seethed with noise as the list of demands was repeated, this time sharper, more threatening, as though volume could impose obedience where reason had failed. Delegates leaned forward, their voices mixing into a storm of derision. They spoke of tribute, of disarmament, of submission dressed as protection, as if the words themselves had power to bend the human will. For every demand they expected concession, but the man before them did not shift. His silence carried the weight of contempt, and the absence of fear unsettled those who had never encountered defiance that did not tremble. The High Speaker pressed harder, invoking the scale of the Empire. Hundreds of fleets, thousands of worlds, untold legions, all arrayed in overwhelming comparison to humanity's small holdings. He spoke of inevitability, of the futility of resistance, of the choice between obedience and annihilation. Entire civilizations had buckled under less. His voice grew sharper, each word laced with the authority of empires that had never been denied. Still the general did not move. His stillness became an answer sharper than any declaration. When at last he did speak, his words were neither elaborate nor loud. He acknowledged nothing of their grandeur, nothing of their threats. His voice was steady, stripped of ceremony, and each syllable cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. He told them that humanity would not surrender. He told them that no tribute would be paid, no fleet disarmed, no laws rewritten by foreign decree. He did not embellish. He did not persuade. He refused, plainly and without hesitation, as if their demands were as meaningless as the air that carried them. The reaction was immediate. Delegates erupted, voices clashing into a deafening roar. Some called for his arrest, others demanded immediate military intervention. The chambers shook with outrage, and the veneer of order shattered. What was meant to be a demonstration of dominance collapsed into a display of fury and panic. The general watched without expression, his arms folded across his chest, letting them unravel under the weight of their own indignation. His calm in the midst of their uproar made their rage seem childish, a tantrum of rulers unaccustomed to refusal. In the chaos, a few voices attempted to reassert control, insisting negotiations could continue, that concessions could be extracted with time. They spoke with the air of strategists, confident that every species had a breaking point. Yet the human had already shown his, it was unyielding. The general interrupted them with a statement that silenced even the loudest accusers. He said humanity had no interest in bargaining under threats. He said the Empire mistook survival for weakness, that they confused endurance with surrender. Then, in words spoken without boast or flourish, he declared that humanity had buried empires before, and would do so again if forced. That declaration cut deeper than any threat of violence. It was not a claim of superiority, nor a plea for mercy. It was the calm assurance of a species that had clawed its way through centuries of war, and refused to be broken by anything less than extinction. To those who understood the gravity of such words, the chamber felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner, as though the walls themselves had tightened around them. The high speaker, enraged, ordered his guards forward. Yet the general did not flinch, did not step back, did not show even the smallest sign of concern. His presence radiated certainty, the kind born not from arrogance but from a conviction anchored in history and sacrifice. He knew what awaited should the Empire choose war, and he accepted it without hesitation. That acceptance unnerved them more than resistance ever could. What followed was inevitable. Voices demanded sanctions, blockades, fleets mobilized against the humans who dared refuse. Every order shouted only revealed how deeply the refusal had cut. The chamber, designed to project authority, had become a theater of disarray. At its center stood the one figure unmoved, the embodiment of defiance, whose few words and unyielding stance had thrown the most powerful empire in the galaxy into chaos. The uproar in the chamber masked a deeper truth the aliens could not grasp. They measured strength in fleets and star systems, in centuries of unbroken dominion, in the illusion that longevity itself was proof of superiority. What they did not understand was that humanity had been tempered in a crucible none of them had endured. To them, war was a rare calamity, a distant memory buried under long stretches of peace. To humans, war was the constant rhythm of history. Every era had been scarred by it. Every century had forged humanity through blood and fire. The general's refusal was not born from arrogance but from memory. Humanity had never risen in tranquil fields or sheltered skies. Earth had been a world of scarcity and violence. Predators stalked its forests, storms reshaped its coasts, disease thinned its numbers. From the beginning, survival was earned, not granted. Where other species evolved in safety, humanity learned to fight long before it learned to speak. That struggle became instinct, carved into the marrow of the species, a legacy passed through generations until conflict was no longer anomaly but foundation. Alien empires, proud of their ancient lineages, could not imagine such a past. They had grown in stability, guided by councils and traditions that endured for ages without collapse. Their wars were brief disputes resolved before true desperation took hold. Humanity had no such fortune. Its story was carved from cycles of conquest and collapse, revolution and resistance. Civilizations rose, burned, and rebuilt. Every fall was followed by resurgence. Where others saw ruin as an ending, humans turned it into renewal. The chamber that now sought to lecture humanity did not know the meaning of ruin. They had not watched their cities turn to ash by their own kind. They had not survived winters where starvation was the only certainty. They had not rebuilt entire nations after devastation so complete that nothing remained but willpower. Humanity had faced extinction not once, but countless times, at its own hands and by nature's. Every time it endured. Every time it learned. Every time it grew stronger. That was what made humanity unpredictable to the Empire. Their species believed control ensured peace, that once authority was established, resistance would vanish. Humanity proved the opposite. Authority was the forge in which rebellion thrived. The more they were pressed, the more fiercely they fought. They adapted not by choice but because adaptation was the only path to survival. They built weapons not from luxury but necessity, and necessity had always been the mother of their invention. The general's calm refusal carried this history. When he said humanity had buried empires before, it was not metaphor. Earth was a graveyard of conquerors. Empires spanning continents had collapsed beneath its wars. Armies once thought invincible had been broken by smaller foes who refused to yield. For thousands of years, no tyrant had held the world without challenge. To the Council, these were distant abstractions. To the humans standing before them, they were lessons carved into the soul of his species. What unsettled the chamber was not the refusal itself, but the certainty behind it. The delegates could not imagine a species so willing to defy overwhelming force without hesitation. To them, survival meant submission. To humans, survival meant resistance, no matter the odds. The legacy of their ancestors demanded it. That legacy echoed in the general's stance, in his unshaken gaze, in his unwillingness to even pretend at negotiation. The Empire believed itself eternal, yet the humans' presence whispered a different truth. Eternity was an illusion. Every power eventually fractured. Every dominion eventually faced resistance that could not be erased. Humanity had always been that resistance, against nature, against each other, against extinction itself. Now it stood as resistance against the galaxy. The chamber could not yet see it, but history was already shifting. The refusal was not a moment of arrogance. It was the first ripple of a storm that would break across the Empire. The Council's fury translated swiftly into action. Orders spread across the Empire's networks, sanctions were decreed, and fleets were dispatched toward human space with the expectation of swift submission. Trade routes were cut, ambassadors recalled, and propaganda poured through imperial channels declaring humanity a rebellious species that would be pacified within weeks. To the Council, this was procedure, a routine response to defiance. They did not realize the trap had already closed around them. The general had never come seeking peace. His silence, his refusal, had bought time. While the Council raged, humanity had prepared. The fleets they dismissed as insignificant were already in motion. Supply lines were fortified, colonies hardened, and strike groups dispersed into positions the Empire did not anticipate. Where imperial tacticians imagined a static defense, the humans had designed a war of shadows. The first imperial patrols encountered this reality at the frontier. Communications cut without warning, escorts destroyed before distress signals could escape, entire formations swallowed by silence. The reports that did reach the Council were fragmented, filled with disbelief. Ships disabled not by brute force, but by precision strikes that left entire crews blind and helpless. Systems corrupted, navigation severed, reactors stalled, tools of warfare the Empire considered minor annoyances, wielded by humanity with surgical efficiency. The Empire retaliated with overwhelming numbers, deploying fleets intended to crush resistance through sheer mass. Yet each incursion was met not head-on but with ambushes, feints, and sudden disappearances. Human vessels appeared without warning, struck vital targets, and vanished before retaliation could lock onto them. The adaptability of their tactics bewildered Imperial commanders. Every plan crafted to counter one strategy collapsed as humans shifted instantly to another. What unsettled the Council most were the reports of ingenuity. Humans turned civilian ships into raiders, converted mining equipment into weapons, and used the very blockades meant to isolate them as baited traps. Their forces were small compared to the Empire's, yet every loss inflicted carried disproportionate weight, spreading panic along trade corridors once considered safe. The more the Empire pressed, the more chaotic its own systems became. The general had anticipated the psychology of the Empire as clearly as he had anticipated its fleets. He understood their reliance on ritual, their arrogance in overwhelming force, their inability to adapt quickly to the unexpected. Every move he made exploited those flaws. Where the Council believed war would cement their authority, it instead fractured it. Worlds far from human space began to question the strength of an empire that could not silence a single species. As panic spread, the chamber sessions grew longer, more desperate. Delegates who had once mocked humanity now demanded stricter measures, while others whispered about the danger of escalation. Every new report of a lost patrol or disrupted supply line fueled arguments that tore at the unity the Empire prided itself on. The chaos that had begun with silence in the chamber now echoed through every level of their authority. The general had achieved his purpose. He had not merely resisted, he had forced the Empire into revealing its weaknesses. Their size had become a liability, their pride a weapon turned against them. Humanity, small in number, had shown that survival did not require parity of strength but mastery of unpredictability. They did not fight for conquest, nor for glory. They fought because existence itself demanded it, and in that demand lay an advantage no empire could erase. By the time the Council realized the scale of their miscalculation, it was too late. The war they thought to end in weeks had become a struggle that threatened the very image of their invincibility. Humanity had refused to kneel, and in that refusal had sparked a conflict that spread beyond ships and borders. The Empire trembled not only at the battles being lost, but at the deeper truth revealed, that a species willing to fight without compromise could unravel an order thought eternal. The chamber reconvened in turmoil. Reports flooded in faster than the Council could process them, each one contradicting the myth of imperial supremacy. Outposts burned, convoys vanished, and supply lines once thought unassailable buckled under relentless strikes. Delegates shouted across one another, their voices filled with panic rather than command. The order that had once defined their rule dissolved into fear, and the silence of the human general's refusal now echoed as prophecy. Panic turned into accusation. Species that had demanded immediate war now blamed their allies for failures in strategy. Others questioned whether humanity had been underestimated from the beginning. Fear spread like a contagion, infecting every exchange, and the chamber that once embodied unity became a theater of weakness. At the heart of that weakness stood the memory of one man who had spoken without pleading, who had looked upon the assembled dominion of the galaxy and dismissed it. The human general did not return to parley, but his message carried through encrypted transmissions that no blockade could intercept. His words reached the Empire not as apology or petition but as warning. He reminded them humanity had not begun the conflict, but that it would finish it if forced. He told them their fleets were vast, their dominion long, but neither was eternal. He told them survival had shaped humanity into something the Empire could neither predict nor control. And he ended with a promise that if war continued, the Empire itself would bear the cost of its arrogance. The weight of those words spread faster than the Empire's decrees. Admirals at the frontier found their crews unsettled, commanders hesitated at orders, and whispers of doubt reached even the core worlds. They began to see what the chamber tried to deny: humans did not posture. They did not bluff. Every action proved their resolve. They fought with the cold precision of a species that had endured extinction in every form imaginable and learned to rise regardless. The war dragged on longer than any projection had allowed. For every fleet sent to crush humanity, another frontier world suffered disruption. The loss of prestige began to fracture the very foundation of imperial authority. Species once loyal questioned whether allegiance to a weakening empire was wise. Rivals who had waited in silence now tested boundaries, emboldened by the sight of imperial fleets stretched thin by a foe they had dismissed as insignificant. Humanity had not only resisted, they had ignited a chain reaction that destabilized the order of an empire older than their presence among the stars. In the chamber, desperation reached its peak. Some demanded escalation to absolute war, the annihilation of Earth itself, though others whispered that such an attempt might fail and reveal a vulnerability too great to risk. The debate became poison, paralyzing decisions while humanity continued to strike. The power once unquestioned had been punctured, and the illusion of invincibility could not be repaired. The general's final communique arrived not with pomp, but with the same stark clarity as his first refusal. He told the Empire that humanity did not seek conquest. They sought only to live free, and any who tried to strip that freedom would find themselves broken by the cost of their own aggression. It was not a plea, not an offer, not even an invitation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a species that had never learned to bow. The council chamber fell silent at last. The noise of accusation, the demands for retaliation, the voices of arrogance all dimmed under the weight of inevitability. They had seen what defiance unleashed. They had watched their fleets humiliated, their authority shaken, their dominion questioned. Chaos had begun with one man refusing to sit, and it had grown into a storm that no decree could control. The Empire learned in those moments what humanity had always known. Power was not measured in the scale of fleets or the span of territories, but in the resolve of those unwilling to yield. Against that resolve, even empires trembled. And from that day forward, the galaxy understood that humanity would never negotiate away its survival.